and welcome to A Dose of Wellbeing, the Pharmacist Support podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Cochran, the Wellbeing Development Senior Manager here at Pharmacist Support, the profession's independent charity. We're delighted to bring you inspiring stories, tips, and expert insights that can help enhance your well-being and make a positive impact in your professional life. This podcast is all about supporting you, our pharmacy family, as you navigate the challenges of the profession. Today we have a special guest, Paul Sunderland, our specialist addictions counsellor at Pharmacist Support. Paul provides invaluable support to pharmacists and their families, as well as students and trainees. We're excited to dive into his background, the challenges faced by our pharmacy family, and the support available through the charity. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Big pleasure.
Thank you. So let's start by getting to know you a little bit better. It's always a good place to start. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, maybe what led you to getting into the field of addictions?
Okay. Well, first of all, you will have noticed I'm knocking on a bit, so there's quite a big background when you're at my age. But I'm an addiction psychotherapist. I'm a consultant and trainer. I've worked in the field. I'm often introduced as having worked for like 40 years, but there comes a point in which having a certain amount of years starts to make you sound too old. But I have been working in the addictions field for just under 40 years.
Right.
In different capacities. This is my second career. I was on the edge of the music industry, but age 23, I was a lost boy, a heroin addict. I went to rehab, one of the very first addiction rehabs, certainly for heroin addiction, and really benefited from recovery. And I worked for quite a long time, earning a decent amount of money, but I did some volunteer work at Reading Prison once a week in the evenings, and we did a class. We had woodwork one side and sort of English as a foreign language the other side, and ours was the drug class about recovery. And I came back from that, and it had more meaning for me than anything else that I did, and I decided I wanted to train as an addictions counsellor, which is what I did. I then trained as a psychotherapist. I trained in psychology, and I worked in residential treatment, in a hospital-based addiction treatment for probably about 20 years. I now work in private practice, but it is a real privilege for me to have as part of my work the work that I do for the charity, for Pharmacist Support.
That's wonderful. And it sounds like a profession where there would be a lot of reward to it, internal reward. And I wonder what you find the most rewarding and maybe the most challenging about doing this kind of work.
Okay, well, another big question.
Yes.
Nicely asked. Well, what is most rewarding is that in general nowadays, if somebody wants to get well, they can get well. We can help them to get well, and that's a marvellous thing. Having said that, after heart disease and cancer, addiction kills more people than any other illness in this country.
Yeah.
Actually, smoking kills more, and we tend in addiction, and we'll talk about it more, be thinking about drug and alcohol addictions and what we call the process addictions that I'll talk about. But actually 99.9% of people who suffer from addiction also smoke.
Right.
So, there's some really high mortality rates. And so what is satisfying is helping people to get well. But by get well, that means helping people who lost faith in human beings to learn to co-regulate their emotions, to put their faith back into a belief, I can be myself in some situations. I can manage things that felt previously impossible to manage. I can manage them without resorting to my addiction, either the use of drugs or some of the processes that might be spending, forms of eating, sexual behaviour, exercises, busyness, relationship stuff. So it's really seeing people change. And we were talking earlier about how people, it's not just one person who recovers. Nearly everybody is part of a group. Maybe there's going to be on average 4 other people, some of them children, who will have been affected by addiction. So we're talking about a recovery for treating one person ends up treating a system, a family system, a social system, a community system, a professional system.
So really impactful work.
Yeah, it's very rewarding. There's no doubt about that. I think the hardest thing is it's when somebody can't quite find the courage to face their shame. We can only own we can only change what we acknowledge. Mm-hmm. And so recovery from addiction does have to begin with saying, I have a problem, it's in me, it's not their fault, or that it's not the fault of that, it's in me. Mm-hmm. So it's always a bit sad when people find that really difficult, but our job is to try and find a way to help people, and that's part of what we're doing here, to normalise, destigmatise addiction, because we're talking about an illness.
Yeah, and you mentioned shame, and I think shame it can be just such a huge barrier, can't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And shame is the feeling there's something wrong with me, I'm not good enough, I didn't get the instruction manual, or there's a chapter missing, or they didn't join the wires, and I can't tell anybody about that because that would just be awful, it would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
And so that feeling, I am not good enough, and shame it tends to be one of the things that addiction is trying to mask. People are trying to, shame fuels addiction, and unfortunately addiction creates more shame.
Right. So it's a sort of perpetuating cycle then.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. And so for people who are listening to the podcast and they're not quite sure where the line is for when you cross into addiction, like what would you say are some of the signs that someone might be actually struggling with an addiction?
Okay, it's such an important question because it's not binary. It's not you either are or you aren't.
Okay.
And of course, there are some people who hardly drink at all. There are some people that maybe drink at the weekends. Or some people get very drunk at the weekend. There might be some people just take drugs at certain times, and then we can have other people who actually, once they begin, they don't know when they're going to stop. Might be doing it all the time.
Yeah.
Or indeed, certainly with chemical addiction, the sort of binge category where people might do it very consistently for a few weeks and then stop for a few weeks.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for them because they tend to be able to say, well, I can stop, can't I? But once they start it comes up again. But in general, what we're looking for, the real marker of addiction is continued use. So continuing to do something despite knowledge that it's not in my best interests.
Okay.
It's about a loss of control, and it's about unsuccessful attempts to control. So somebody might say, I'm going to stop drinking spirits, I'll just drink wines, I'll just drink at the weekend. It doesn't happen. Compulsive spenders, I'm going to cut up my credit cards, I won't take any more loans, I'll consolidate my loans, but somehow it happens, it happens again.
Yeah.
I'm going to go on this diet, I'm going to restrict this way of eating. It happens again. But the symptoms in general, we look for preoccupation. Mm-hmm. So people who might wake up thinking about my addiction, I go to bed thinking about it, I make love to my wife thinking about it, I talk to my children and it's on my mind, I'm preoccupied. Mm-hmm. We look for tolerance, so people need to do more of the same thing or take more of the same substance to achieve that amount. It might be, 10 milligrams of diazepam sort of work this week, but I need 20 milligrams to feel the same way.
Right.
5 pints becomes 10 pints, 1 gram becomes 5 grams to achieve. So a sense of tolerance. We look for a withdrawal, a feeling of when I stop, actually I just want more. I feel low, life isn't worth living. And a lot of people who suffer from addiction tend to feel that somehow they wouldn't survive if they didn't. Mm-hmm. So they might say, I have people say to me, I just don't think I'm going to manage if I stop drinking. And of course, for us and the family members, you think, I'm not sure you're going to survive if you keep drinking.
Right.
We look for loss of control. Once I start, I don't know when I'm going to stop. These unsuccessful attempts to stop. But particularly this all-consuming relationship with harmful consequences, an impact on mental health, an increase in depression, shame, anxiety, physical health problems, which everybody will know about, and particularly the pharmacist community will be aware of as a result. Financial problems, spending money, the secrecy that goes through it, the relational problems, because for many people with partners, the addict's relationship with their addiction feels like a betrayal. It feels like it's some other lover.
Right.
And the impact on them and what's happening and how they get pulled pulled into it all too. What have I done wrong? Do I need to end up covering up and lying and all of that?
Right.
So all sorts of relational problems, all sorts of issues around childcare, of course, because addicts tend to be very bright. They have an awful lot of love, and they are committed people with real values. But what happens with addiction is those values get trumped by the need.
Right. And would you say there are any common underlying causes of addiction?
Well, I know you well enough to know that what you'll think about all of this, Melissa, as a fellow psychotherapist. And I think the answer is yes. I mean, what we do notice is that people who suffer from addiction have lost faith in human beings to regulate their feelings.
Yeah.
In order to do that, as human beings, we are group animals. We exist in groups. So,
Absolutely.
So something has to happen to lose faith in that. People have some bad experiences, sometimes incidents, but usually over a period of time, where actually they feel that the only way forward is a compulsive self-reliance.
Yeah.
Telling you how I feel and expecting to feel better won't work. What's more, I might feel even worse as a result of it.
Okay.
So I think that's a thing in common. We're talking about people who've lost the ability to co-regulate and are putting a lot of emphasis on self-regulation. And that tends to then become survival rather than self-care.
Yeah.
It drives people crazy, and that's where addiction comes from.
Yeah.
I think we do have to ask, the question about, so why is it that people lose faith in human beings? And I think increasingly we talk about what's been called now, since the 90s, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Sounds like a very big thing. But in a sense, we're talking about developmental issues that people have, difficulties people have that are stressful, but they don't have anyone around them to help them to make sense of them.
Right.
So stress without attachments becomes a trauma.
Okay.
I mean, humans are enormously resilient. Children are enormously resilient.
Yeah.
But as long as somebody say, gosh, this is awful, how do you feel? It shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
But in the absence of that, and particularly if people have early life adversity with their caregivers, it has an enormous impact on regulation.
Yeah. You sometimes hear people talk about some people have an addictive personality. Do you believe that there can be some people who are more inclined towards addiction than others for a biological reason, or do you think that there's an interplay of biology and nature and nurture, if you will?
I think there is. I mean, I think in general things might be genetically proposed, but mostly they're environmentally disposed. There is no addictive gene. I understand entirely when somebody says I've got an addictive personality, they are reflecting very honestly on their behaviour. Yeah. But I think what we'd have to say is you have an addictive survival personality.
Right.
Rather than an addictive personality.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Interesting.
So addiction is an adaptive response,
Yeah.
I think, to quite complex stress.
Yes.
In the interests of survival. Very often we're talking about people who've had a trauma, and all traumas, as you know, are characterized by captivity and powerlessness. I don't have any choices. I have no choice and no voice.
Yeah.
The problem is that addiction, which seems like a solution, becomes a re-traumatization. People are captive to their addictions and powerless over them.
Yeah.
They have no choice and voice.
Right. Sounds like a very difficult position to be in. And do you think there are any interesting developments in working with addiction that people might be interested to know about?
Over the years, yes, and I've been in the field long enough to really see that happen. So at the beginning of addiction treatment, it was about alcohol treatment, and people tended to think that, somehow I'm just allergic in a way to alcohol. I think what we realized is that people stop drinking and actually find themselves using other mood-altering chemicals, and it then works the other way around.
Right.
So you treat heroin addicts and they're abstinent from heroin, but they might come back to treatment a few years later as alcoholics, having never drunk before.
Okay.
But with alcohol dependence. So I think the first thing that we've seen is that addiction isn't about a substance. It's about a need for a change in mood.
Yeah.
That becomes all-consuming. The next thing we then started to see was that actually addiction can show up in other areas, and I mentioned it before, we're now calling process addictions. So either people who are in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction, or indeed people just having addictions starting this way with eating disorders, so compulsive overeating, the anorexias, the orthorexias, which is a really fascinating sort of area, the unhealthy obsession with healthy eating that drives people mad. If I can just get this right, but the restricting with anorexia, the compulsive overeating, the comfort eating, the bulimias that swing between the two. We find the financial addictions, on the one hand, very obvious things like gambling, which has all the same symptoms, the preoccupation, the tolerance, the withdrawal when I don't do it, the loss of control, I'm going to stop going, I'm not going to get rid of the apps on my phone. Yeah. So all these things that we're calling process addictions, the financial spending, people, what we call under-earning, keeping themselves very small, people with PhDs who want to have jobs that actually really keep them under the radar. Yeah. The sex addictions, the relational addictions, so-called love addiction, and the word that lots of people know, but no one isn't actually a medical term, but it makes sense to people, codependency. Yes. The management of anxiety through how you are in relationship with other people. Yeah. So the process addiction, so understanding chemicals, these are long answers to your questions, Melissa.
That's okay. We like long answers.
But this realizing that addiction is inside people is not in a substance. It's an inside job, and that's why recovery is an inside job. The process addictions, understanding that addiction migrates, but also understanding that there are 3 stages. So if somebody presents, as they often do with pharmacist support, with a drug or alcohol problem, they may well have other things we need to look at in terms of process addictions, but underneath that, they're nearly always going to have a stress or trauma history.
Yeah, and I think this is so important,
and we needed to deal with that bit, because if we don't, we're putting ointment on a rash rather than doing something about a virus.
Well, and it sounds like it could end up being, I'm going to say something that I hope will make sense to British listeners being American. We have a game called whack-a-mole. You know, you like whack it with the hammer and it pops up somewhere else. So it sounds to me it's a little bit like that. Like if you're not dealing with the underlying reason for the need for this addictive behavior, you might stop drinking alcohol, but then, an addiction to gambling might pop up or something like that. So we're trying to get underneath it.
Completely, I like that whack-a-mole, and I think people often talk about having 5 dustbins and 4 lids. There's always something that's there, and part of the job of helping people enter recovery is giving them the psychoeducation about this. Yeah. That don't be ashamed. This is what's likely to happen. You have been self-regulating for so long that it's desperate to find a way to soothe you. And we need to help you to have a healthy self-regulation. We need to encourage you to do what's never felt safe, to co-regulate, to be able to share and manage your feelings with some others without persuading them they can trust everybody, because you obviously can't. Right.
Yeah. That's really, really helpful. And I think that will help people to understand addiction as well, and maybe why getting treatment is so important, rather than just sort of saying, I'm going to stop drinking, because it could morph into something else then. So you want to get the right treatment. And I just wonder, with the work you've been doing with us for a long time, is there anything specific in working in pharmacy or other health professions that you think might increase the risk of addictive behaviors?
I think there are quite a few things that increase the risk for pharmacists. One, very obviously, is access to mood-altering chemicals. Yeah. I think also being in a profession in which being there for others is such a skill, and sometimes our assets can become our liabilities. We can be so good at something that maybe it's not so easy to ask for help. Yeah. I think often there's in organizations and in pharmacies, the pharmacist has a leadership role. So again, there's not a vulnerability. There's a difficulty being vulnerable to others. There's a sense of needing to role model. And maybe also not having anybody really checking what you're doing so much.
Yeah.
I think for locums, it's quite difficult too. Again, and not really a sense of belonging coming in, often troubleshooting.
Yeah.
And actually, many locums do get into difficulties. It is easier to have access to medications if you're a locum. People might not know exactly when it went missing.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned that it can be hard for pharmacists to reach out for support sometimes because they feel a need to maybe be a model to their community, or they might not want to be seen to be needing support. That can be kind of a hard thing to admit when you're in a helping profession. And that may be one challenge, but what do you see as the challenges for pharmacists, pharmacy students and trainees when it comes to seeking support for an addiction?
Well, I think with all the professions that are regulated, there is a fear of fitness to practice issues. Sure. And we're talking about a group of people. Addiction isn't, it doesn't happen overnight. It's not a banana skin you slip on the street. It builds up over time. For many people, they don't really realise it's built up until it's really got a life of its own. And so they're at best baffled and distressed, and at worst sort of traumatised, with it all. So I think, Melissa, the big difficulty is this increased sense of shame for a healthcare professional to have a health issue, as a respectable member of the community. Yeah, a feeling of, gosh, how did this happen to me? Am I some sort of hypocrite? What will people think? Does it invalidate me completely if I ask for help? Yeah. And that's our challenge, is to help people understand that, we're talking about sick people who are unwell, who need help to get well, not bad people. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's that feeling of separateness, isn't it? That can be so damaging. Yes. So for pharmacists who are listening to this, can you just tell us what types of addictions that you can support with and that they could come to us with at Pharmacist Support? Okay. Well, often people will think about their addictions as being to one chemical. I've got an alcohol problem. I've got a stimulant problem. I've got a central nervous system depressant problem, a tranquilizer problem. I've got an opioid problem. These are the things that we can support, but I think at some point very early on we need to help people understand that the problem isn't the drug, it's in them, and actually what people tend to have is a hierarchy of drugs that they like. So in the absence of the opioids, I might be quite happy to take a benzodiazepine, or in the absence of the alcohol, I might take an amphetamine or a stimulant of some kind. So certainly around all the drugs, mood-altering chemicals, and I do keep saying alcohol and drugs because alcohol is a drug. It just happens to be legal. It's a mood-altering chemical, right. and it's probably not helpful to say alcohol and drugs, but I think people understand why we do at this stage because it's so sanctioned. But the other addictions, we can help people with what we call compulsive debting, and compulsive debting really comes out of compulsive spending, if you like, compulsive wanting. People might say they're shopaholic, but either way, it's an inability to say no to wanting, and an inability that actually then has people spending money they haven't got, telling themselves they'll work it out later, taking all sorts of loans. And we talk to people who've got more credit cards than fit in their wallet, right, and don't even know how many loans they've got. People who've consolidated and then cut up their cards and done it all again. So around the financial addictions, certainly with the eating disorders, I'm always happy to assess and try and help people with eating disorders. Anorexia, as you know, is the most enduring healthcare condition. It has the highest mortality rate of all mental health issues. Yeah, because we're talking about people who, it's not about people who just don't eat to live. They live to lose weight. Right. And they will eat their fat and then their organs, and anorexics do die because the last organ they eat is their heart. They literally eat their heart out, and it has it's an addiction, plus it has all these mental health issues around dysmorphia. I believe that I'm big.
Yeah.
I don't trust my scales.
Yeah.
And we're talking about very intelligent people who've been hijacked by this distress. But certainly helping with eating disorders and compulsive overeating and the bulimias. Certainly orthorexias too, although people tend not to turn up and ask for help with orthorexia, mostly because they believe that they just haven't found the right intervention. Orthorexia is like, if only I can find the right intervention or the right mineral or vitamin or supplement, my life will be different. So they tend not to come in. It tends to be something that you see under the surface.
Okay.
Gambling, certainly we see a lot and we can help with, because again, people have all the secrecy. I haven't told my husband, I haven't told my wife, that this is happening. I've spent the money that we put aside for our holiday. I've got a credit card that no one knows about.
Right.
I feel like killing myself because it hasn't happened. Lots of, high levels of suicide around gambling.
Okay.
Certainly for men. In midlife, lots of shame, and men tend to kill themselves mostly around money.
Wow, I didn't know that.
That's the main reason for the shame around money.
Okay.
We can certainly treat people who are coming in with things like exercise addiction or workaholism, but again, people tend not to present with that. Workaholism tends to be worn as a badge of honour. I was in the office at 5 o'clock this morning and leave till 9 o'clock. What a great guy I am.
Yeah.
Rather than, oh, God, you haven't got a very balanced life, have you? And what about the children that are waiting at home?
Right, right.
So, these things aren't the sort of in your face, but we often see that sort of thing. And workaholism isn't about work. It's about being busy. It's about, it's a project addiction. It's almost like...
Is it an avoidance of something?
Okay, well, you're getting on to something really interesting, because behind these addictions are essentially the stress responses of flight or freeze.
Yes.
So anorexia is a flight, for example. If only I can get my body right, get to the right weight, everything will be all right.
Yeah.
It's a flight. Cocaine, stimulant addiction is a flight. It's, we're going to take this and we're going to get really, really busy. And somehow if we can just get busy, we can be perfect and we can be lovable and we can be safe and secure.
Yeah.
Alcohol tends to be more of a freeze addiction, a bit like gaming or something. Let's just sort of take this, numb out, forget the world exists.
Yeah.
So essentially, if you think of mood altering chemicals, you have central nervous system stimulants and central nervous system depressants. The stimulants are a flight response, as in fight and flight, and the depressants are a freeze response. And flight is, and you think about a flight animal. A horse is a flight animal. There's a sense of danger here. If I can just run really fast and get over there, I'll be okay.
Yeah.
And we're talking about people who haven't been able to regulate their nervous systems with others, who believe that if I can just get myself right, then I can be safe and secure and lovable.
Yeah.
Or with the freeze, if I can just switch off these feelings, I can survive and be in the world.
Yeah, yeah. That's really fascinating. And for people who are really struggling, I'm sure you have seen it hundreds of times, but it can feel really daunting to reach out for help. And I think people are really afraid of what might happen next. So I just wonder, in terms of our pharmacy listeners, what can people expect if they call our number and ask for help?
Okay.
What would happen next?
Well, I think what they can expect is confidentiality, that the purpose will be to think together with another person about what's going on. So for us to assess together what's happening now, what's been happening, where do you want to get to, what do you think you need, so that we can come up with a recovery plan for their consideration.
I think that will be really reassuring to people to hear, especially the confidentiality piece, because I think there's a lot of fear around the regulator, as you
well,
said
and
before.
also I think for social services, so there's
yes,
quite a sort of some gender politics here too. A mother with a young daughter is going to be very anxious about saying, I can't stop drinking.
Right.
Could be a son, of course, as well, but with a child.
Yes.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just like, oh gosh, what's somebody going to come? Will I lose my child?
Right.
let alone, again, what will people think of me? So the difficulty asking for help it's the shame, the stigma of being seen and exposure. But there's another exposure that people have is that if I ask for help and I don't get well, I really will be exposed as the failure that I feel that I am. So there's almost a belief I can't survive
better not to try
it.
in case it doesn't work.
Nicely put.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So in terms of our support for pharmacists, we can help with both inpatient and community treatment. When we're talking about students and trainees, we can't really help with the inpatient part, but can you talk a little bit about what kind of support might be available for students and trainees?
Well, the support that's available is really the support that's probably available to anybody which is going towards local drug and alcohol teams. But that is very complicated. If you are the pharmacist in the community, it would be a bit like, imagine you're the policeman who has a drug or alcohol problem.
Yeah.
You're going to find it very difficult going to a drug and alcohol team. You're also going to be worried that if you're talking to your local GP, that they might report you for fitness to practice. So I think currently the truth is for pharmacist students, this is very difficult. They don't have access to the funding for residential treatments. Most people who have residential treatment are people who haven't been able to get well in the community. Actually, they're people who have become more ill in the community, because if you try something and it doesn't work, you tend to feel that it was because I wasn't good enough rather than the intervention wasn't enough. And we all know that mental health services are really strapped for cash and resources and don't necessarily always know fully what they're doing.
Yeah.
So an inpatient treatment can provide a detox, a sense of going somewhere else, out of community, have a sort of total immersion in the world of recovery to come back out different, rather than be doing something in the community that maybe has an appointment once a week. Right.
Okay. And if a student or trainee were to speak to you, would you be able to provide them with some guidance as to where they might find help in their community? Is that part of what you do?
Definitely.
Okay.
And also provide them with self-help that they might be able to access online outside their community. And in some cases, some follow-up with me and some counselling, but also, of course, referral to wellness and to the counselling service alongside, because people with addiction problems don't just have addiction problems.
Right. So even though they might not be able to do the residential treatment, there are still other ways that we can support students and trainees.
Yes, indeed.
That's great. And I think when you're talking about someone who has an addiction, it doesn't just impact them, but it's also their family, the people who care about them. Do you provide support to anyone else who's connected with the person who's facing the addiction?
Yes, certainly, mostly to partners.
Okay.
Not currently really to children, but certainly to partners.
Yeah.
And they can be a very important part of the assessment process. Addiction, as you know well, is unlike other illnesses. One of the symptoms is what we would call denial. It's a rationalization, essentially, some mental gymnastics that tell you that it's not as bad as it is. So people can come along and think they're being quite honest. And often I have people say, well, no one really knows. It hasn't really affected anyone. But actually, if they do have a partner, it's always quite good to say, look, come along, let's have an assessment session too with your partner and see what they think you need, and let's keep them involved. They felt shut out for such a long time by this, get them involved. And invariably, the partner knows completely what's been going on.
Interesting. So they think they don't, but they do.
Exactly that. And so it becomes, that becomes almost a sort of family therapy, if you like. But it also involves, because if you think about addiction as being something that it comes first, it excludes family, or family comes second, then actually, and in fact we know this from the research that we did at Cloud's House very early on, that the most significant factor in treatment outcome is family involvement, because the family have often become an enabling system unwittingly.
Yeah.
mum or dad have rung up and made excuses, or they've given money, they've fallen for, if only I had a bit more money, everything would be all right, all of that. We've had, husbands, wives ringing up and saying, so-and-so isn't very well today. They can't come into work, this covering up.
Yeah.
So they end up enabling for good with big hearts.
Yeah.
But actually it enables the disease of addiction to flourish. So if we can help both heal and educate the family members as well, then actually the family becomes a sort of self-healing system.
That's lovely. That's lovely. So what would you say to someone who might be listening? They're connecting to some of this. They're thinking, okay, I think I might be struggling with addiction. What would you say to someone right now in that situation?
I would like to affirm somebody who can ask the question, I think I may be struggling with something. I think the thought that they are means there's a possibility that they are. And look, come and have a chat. Let's assess this together. Let's see whether, is it a thing? Is it not a thing? And if it is a thing, then it is a thing that we can help you with. And let's not be ashamed. Let's think about where do you want to be? Because if you think you're struggling, then you're not happy with where you are. And we're not trying to get people away from something. In fact, very often with addiction recovery, if you're just trying to get away from something, at some point you think, oh, maybe it's okay, and you end up going back. I'm very concerned with what we replace it with. Where are we headed? Let's not just get away. What are we moving towards? How do we get there? So if you think that you're struggling with an addiction problem, let's talk about it. Two heads are better than one. And let's think about, how could life be better if there wasn't this struggle? And how could we get there?
That's a wonderful note for us to close on.
Okay.
So thank you so much. I think this has been a really great conversation, and I suspect it's going to help a lot of people out there, not just pharmacists who might be struggling with addiction, but maybe people who care about them, or they might think of someone that they know that they can feel a bit more compassion towards. I think it's really important to open up these conversations. So I really thank you for coming on today. And we always hope that our listeners are feeling inspired to bring about positive changes in their own lives. So if today's podcast has resonated with you, you'll find further well-being information, videos, and online content on our website and on our well-being learning platform, which is available to pharmacists, pharmacy students, and trainees for free. For further information on our support services, including our addiction support, please click on the How We Can Help link in the podcast description. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you feel you may need support. We want to continue providing our free and confidential support services and to open up conversations like this to ensure that no one in our pharmacy family faces challenging times alone. As an independent charity, we rely on donations from individuals and organizations across the profession to enable us to do this. So if you're in a position to do so, please consider making a donation today. You can find a QR code in the show's description or at the end of the video. Donations help us to provide our essential services, including our counseling and peer support, financial assistance, and addiction support services. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you again for joining us today, Paul.
Big pleasure.
And we look forward to seeing you again at our next podcast.